think that at this point, my love for Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze has no end. I've talked a lot about both of these games before because of how much they mean to me. So today I'm going to be ranking all the bosses in both games combined. There are 14 total, so let's get started. Number 14 is the first boss of the first of these games, being Mugly from Returns. Now, while I don't think that Returns' bosses are bad compared to Tropical Freeze's, they just aren't as good. Mugly is the first boss, so of course you wouldn't expect them to be challenging or that interesting or whatever, but all you're really doing is jumping on him, avoiding his spikes and his charges. It's not a bad fight for the beginning, but every time after that it isn't really as fun. Number 13 is the Scurvy Crew. The Scurvy Crew have an awesome theme, and I prefer to call them the Pinchin' Pirates. They're a trio of pirates that are also crabs that you fight at the end of the beach world in Returns. And what you gotta do with them is simply just jump on their heads and roll into them when they stick their arms up when they're in a crab stack. I think it's a pretty cool idea how they have dynamic music and such, but they're pretty basic, being so early in the game. Number 12 is Thugly. Now, Thugly, unlike the first two bosses we've talked about, is one of the last bosses in Returns of the Cliff World. He's pretty much just a reskin of Mugly, but a lot more challenging and a lot more fun, seeing as how he breathes fire. The arena changes 2 times after the first time. Plus, there's the fact that when he charges at you, he has a shell on his back made out of rock. You have to avoid that. He's purple, and I always found him to be a bit creepy when I was younger. But he still is a lot of fun, even if he can be a little too challenging, especially in mirror mode. Number 11 is Mango Ruby, which, unsurprisingly, is from Returns. Now, Mango Ruby used to be my favorite boss in the game, and while it isn't true anymore, I do think he's a lot of fun. What you gotta do is climb on the Queen Grass platforms, which are used quite frequently in the Forest World where he appears, and you gotta slam on these arrows on the ground to make them go from blue to orange. Then, when he starts chasing you, his back stops becoming electric and turns into berries that you can jump on top of. Then you can slam into more arrows and continue to do so. It's a pretty fun fight, but I mainly love it because Mango Ruby is such a unique design you can't really find anywhere else in the game. Number 10 is Mole Miner Max, also from Returns. I mainly love this boss because of how quick you can actually beat it. If you have Diddy with you and you're really good at roll jumping and hovering, you can easily get to the main minecarts that you ride on, and I think it's really cool how this boss fight feels like an action-packed chase throughout a minecart tunnel. And what you gotta do is hop on a bunch of the moles' heads when the minecart gets close enough, or you do what I just said. Then they turn electric, and eventually you have to hop on Mole Miner Max himself, who even throws pickaxes at you. It's a pretty cool fight because of how fast it feels, and the music is good too. Number 9 is Stu. Stu is only the third boss in Returns, but he can be pretty challenging for a newcomer. You have to throw bombs at him, but he's a bird, so he's gonna fly around. He's in this big golden pot, which makes sense since he's an ancient bird, and he looks absolutely crazy. He's a lot of fun too, and after you defeat him, he loses all of his feathers, which can be pretty unsightly if you don't really like that. But he even has his own missiles to make the blocks on the ground decrease. And I think it's a really fun fight. The music has a whole Ruins Egyptian vibe, and I really like it too. Number 8 is Colonel Pluck. Now, Colonel Pluck is probably one of the most mixed feeling bosses I have from Returns. The reason for that is because although I really love his music, his theme song, and a lot of people in the DKC Return speedrun community do too. Well, the whole community, not just speedrunning. But it can be kind of slow because you have to avoid his feet, and you have to go underneath them. And then when the clinging grass platform, underneath his Stompy Bot 3000 appears, you gotta slam it. And after you do this 3 times, he flies around, and the real fun part of the boss happens because you have to avoid all the eggs he drops down, kind of like another bird boss we'll be talking about later down the line. And when you do jump on these chickens, they can explode. You gotta be careful of that, and then you gotta jump on him when he slams down. It's one of the most challenging fights in either game, but that can make it really fun, especially in the second half. And number 7 is Pompey, the first boss in Tropical Freeze, and what do you know, we finally got the Tropical Freeze's bosses. The theme is like heavy metal guitar, which is pretty cool, and he's this big seal guy who slides around. You gotta avoid the fish he throws at you, and even some penguins that start jumping by you. It's a really fun fight, and Cranky is surprisingly useful. It just goes to show how amazing Tropical Freeze's bosses are. Number 6 is Tiki Tong, the final boss and the best from Returns. Now, while I don't think it's as nearly as good as Tropical Freeze's final boss, it can still be a lot of fun. You have to avoid Tiki Tong's hands, and his hands are actually made out of the Tiki enemies you see in the game, like all the ones from the first 7 worlds, which is really cool. Eventually, he loses his hands, and he just tries to slam on you, and he shoots fire tikis at you in a ring of fire. You're gonna jump on the button on his back, which is pretty gimmicky, I'll admit, but it still is a fun fight, even if it is a generic giant head with hands boss that Nintendo loves to use a lot. The theme is really good too. And number 5 is going to be Fugu from Tropical Freeze, who's the only underwater boss in either game, so of course he's not gonna be top 1 material, but he still has a lot of fun. You gotta slam into his backside where he's vulnerable and you don't have to worry about his spikes. He sucks in and out air, which is really cool. You gotta avoid the urchins he shoots at you and the fish too. It's a really fun fight, especially when he starts spinning around and becomes huge and takes up half the arena. His team's good too. Number 4 is Scowl. This is the 3rd and final bird boss we'll be talking about today. And Scowl is a huge owl. Pretty clever name, actually. Now, you fight him in 3 different arenas. First, he isn't too challenging, but then he starts blowing gusts of wind at you and a whole array of feathers. And at the top, he sends down a huge army of a bunch of little hoots at you, and you gotta throw the ones from the eggs at him. This can be a really fun fight to speedrun because you can hop off the other owls to throw the hoots at him early. It's a really fun boss for that reason. And it's a great way to cap off Autumn Heights. Number 3 is Baboom, the boss of the 3rd world in Tropical Freeze Bright Savannah. Much like the Scurvy Crew, but a lot better, Baboom has 3 versions of him you gotta fight. Only now he's a lot more diverse attacks compared to the Scurvy Crew, because he can spin around on the ground, he can throw the melon bombs at you, he can even carry himself on a rope and swing a hammer at you. You got a pogo bounce with Cranky if you have him, who's of course very useful for this fight. And you also have to look out when they all start swinging each other, when some of them are ghosts. It's a weird idea to have them come back as ghosts, but it's a lot of fun, and the theme is probably my favorite boss theme in Tropical Freeze. Really fun. Number 2 is Lord Frederick, the final boss in the game. While Tropical Freeze's final boss isn't the best, it's certainly awesome. You gotta look out for all the ice dragons Lord Frederick sends down at you, and in front of you. He slams platforms high up into the air above lava geysers you gotta be careful of. And you gotta throw penguins and his Snowmad army at him into the background, kind of like the K-Rool fight in DKC 3. He charges at you too, and that's easily the hardest part of the fight, because you gotta jump on him a total of 9 times to defeat him. This theme is really good, and it's an awesome way to cap off Tropical Freeze, although it can be a very challenging ending. Number 1 is Bashmaster, the final boss in Juicy Jungle, which is an amazing world, so of course, you gotta have an amazing boss to cap off such an amazing world, right? And he's a big polar bear, and I know a lot of people wish Bashmaster was the final boss, but I honestly don't mind. He's a lot of fun. I love throwing the melons and bombs at him, and jumping on his back after he slams down his huge hammer, and on his head too. He can even just jump up on you and slams ice down, and he becomes covered in the purple grape juice. And at the beginning of the fight, he's only angry at you because you ruined his popsicle, and this entire factory of fruit was made for him, and that just gives him bonus points. Plus there's the fact that he gets more and more purple as the fight goes on. It's an amazing boss fight. I mean, how could you not love it? And how could you not love either of these games? Well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.